justice.
Very good afternoon. And let me first thanks to the Department of Political Science and School of Open Learning for providing me such a bright opportunity to present my work on global justice. Let me first introduce what I am going to present here. What I am trying to develop as a paper is basically it's on new institutions for global justice. And in this paper, I'll be focusing on how the idea of distribution of benefits and resources across the national borders, particularly at the global level, is quite a contentious and politically debated topic. While we are trying to institutionalize at the global level, and I'll be discussing what are the proposals have been given by global justice theorists and philosophers till now, and what are the limitations, and what I am trying to add on, or trying to provide a kind of, you may say, alternative to the design. So, and let me start my presentation first by what is the status of global poverty, particularly in the global south. Now you can look at the data that 2.5 billion lack access to the improved sanitation, and 1 billion children are deprived of one or more services essential to the survival and development. 148 million children under the age of 5 in developing regions are underweight for the race. 22 million infants are not protected from disease by routine immunization, and this is all the data of UNICEF. And in 2008, 8.8 million children worldwide died before their 5th birthday. 4 million newborns worldwide are dying in the first month of life. 2 million children under the age of 15 currently live with HIV. 101 million children are not attending primary school. So, the if you look at the pattern of the data given of United States, UNICEF, you can imagine the idea, imagine the severe conditions of global poverty and the related incidences, basically, and let's come to the data of World Food Program, and it says that the 7 countries are home to 65% of world's hunger, and that includes India, China, Democratic Republic of Congo, then Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Ethiopia. And the interesting is that the number of people suffering from hunger is greater than the population of United States, Canada, and the European Union. So it is a kind of alarming situation to the global political community to think seriously. In fact, think within the ambit of something like, moral paradigm, going beyond the political conception of, helping distant poor or whatever, So that has to be universalized in some sense. So now, let me give you, a kind of response from the global south. What are the leadership, what leadership in global south, they have expressed their views on poverty. So I have enjoyed my liberty to choose late Nelson Mandela from South Africa and Mahatma Gandhi from India, for the reason that both were a kind of human rights activist and the visionary leader and the lawyers by their profession. It's quite amazing to look at what Nelson Mandela, how Nelson Mandela expresses or reflects upon the idea of poverty. In his speech on the Ambassador of Conscience Award, what he says that, like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is people who have made poverty and tolerated poverty, and it is people who will overcome it. So onus is on, us. So it is like, when you think seriously upon this first line, it seems that, Mandela is somewhere talking within the ambit of what we say a kind of Kantian imperative, moral obligation is somehow shifting on us to deal with or to combat or eradicate global poverty. And overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity that has to be, noted down, because charity has its own limitations, and it does not generally enhance the capability of the global poor. So it is not the charity, and it is an act of justice, very clearly saying, and it is the protection of a fundamental rights, the right to dignity and a decent life, which is basically generally how poverty is defined in the last statement, last sentence. And in the same speech is saying, while poverty persists, there is no true freedom. Now, now let's look at what Mahatma Gandhi says. Very simple but quite insightful statement about poverty is, poverty is the worst form of violence. So when you analyze violence and the patterns of violence that you say result into poverty, it has larger ambit, even sometimes beyond imagination what we generally perceive in reality. Now, sorry, it's from, but it's from. From the above statement, it is quite safe to conclude both the leader, human rights activist, and lawyer focus on the poverty as the violation of basic socio-economic human rights. But particularly when you deal with Mandela, Mandela is primarily concerned with the right to live with dignity and the decent survival, and considers poverty as a type of unfreedom. Now, when you try to analyze this statement, it reminds me how most of the people who are, who theorizes on the idea of capability, like Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen, they also talk about various specific kinds of unfreedom. And Nelson Mandela is saying the same thing. It means poverty is a kind of unfreedom, and we have to eradicate it. And Gandhi takes poverty as the as a form of violence or violating the basic human rights of the global poor. Now, when you talk about poverty, basically, and eradicating the poverty in order to protect the fundamental or the basic socio-economic human rights of the global poor, the idea of duty of justice comes in. So, within the ambit of global justice, you have categorization of political, global justice theorists and philosophers, and some global justice theorists, they believe in the positive duty of justice, some believe in the negative duty of justice. So let me start from what Thomas Pogge is, arguing for negative duty of justice. So you can see that the, Thomas Pogge, who believes in a kind of institutional perspective of human rights, is saying that his negative duty of justice is basically based on the harm principle. And if you go by the, I'll come to the next slide, then I'll explain what the harm principle and what is the limitation of the harm principle when you analyze a kind of, the duty of justice through the harm principle. And Simon Kenny and Pablo Gilabert, they disagree on this idea that we should look at the duty of justice from our principles. So let's come to the next slide. I have certain claims against the negative duty of justice proposed by Professor Thomas Pogge, and I have a way forward to the socially connected responsibility, what even Iris Marion Young has suggested. Now let's take up one by one. Thomas Pogge tries to show the poverty is a problem of harm that directly or indirectly we are and our global order produce. On the basis of harm principle, the right not to be harmed or the duty not to do harm others can justify the moral obligations to the global poor. So now look at the idea how it is restricting the moral obligation towards the global poor. His idea of harm principle and moral responsibility is based on the cause and relationship. So suppose if I say that I am not the cause of creating poverty in the Democratic Republic of Congo, so I have not caused anything, any institutional corruption over there, so why I should be responsible to eradicate poverty in that area? So that's called causal connectivity is the problematic issue. Then my claim is that in this interconnected and complex world, it is next to impossible to locate the causal ground of harms all the time, and so causality or say causally connected relationship cannot be used as legitimate ground to either to do or not to do the duty of justice. It will restrict your duty of justice ambit. And also the logic of causal connectivity can be dangerous from the motivational point of view and would restrict the ambit of moral obligation. So that is a serious issue, When you say, I have to help the distant poor, and when you look through the lenses of causal connectivity, then you say, I am not the part of that, hunger, or you say, I'm not the part of that health problem, I'm not the part of that, any poverty-related incidences, so I should not be responsible for that. Now, following the duty of justice, I favor the idea of socially connected responsibility. By socially connected responsibility, what I mean is that even in the absence of any common global political order, there exists an international society which is socially connected across the political communities, It includes both the individuals and institutions as moral agents who contribute to global injustice directly or indirectly and should be held responsible for obligatory justice. It also broadens the scope of the duty of justice, which is, absence in the POGI's schema of negative duty of justice. This is my, addition and a latest, imagination to provide a kind of global South response to the duty of justice. This is also very debatable topic even in, India. So it is like, duty of justice and the global South response. It is Gandhian perspective. And I hope many of our, colleague and, people, they are well known in these ideas. So my claim is that, like various contemporary global justice theorists and philosophers, Gandhi also talks about the duty of affluent to eradicate poverty. And in the very famous journal, Harijan, in 1942, what Gandhi discusses about the duty of the rich. So, however, he does not use the word affluent, but he's using the word rich. So, it is all about trusteeship council. While it is quite a kind of, people generally say it's an abstract idea, it could not be institutionalized, but I have certain claims that it could be institutionalized with certain, moral practices. So it could also be an act of self-conscious, morally autonomous being to act on their own subjective volition without any externally guided force to help the distanced poor in order to, realize their basic socio-economic human rights. So that could be one of the interesting angle to look at. Now let me introduce my primary question of this research paper. This is about how must global institutions be justified and designed in an egalitarian manner that addresses the morally urgent problem of global poverty. Well, I'm not the only one who is doing research on this, and various global justice theorists, philosophers, like, they have presented models for eradicating global poverty. And of course, the first, credit goes to Professor Thomas Pogge and his model of global resources dividend. Of course, this model is, one of the modest proposal, and it talks about a kind of non-participatory tariff, which I have not discussed here. Yeah, I have discussed here. And it deals with who the state who is not complying to the idea of GRD, that should be taxed or other kind of administrative sanctions. But this model has certain limitations. Let me go one by one. Firstly, the GRD proposal, of course, will benefit the worst off, but it does not interfere with the state's sovereign ownership rights over the global resources. So which is a very serious issue. Secondly, it does not give right to the developing nations to participate and design how the rare natural resources of this planet should be used for the future. And if you take it very seriously, this argument can go against the sustainable development. So, any kind of compensatory idea will not serve the future demands. Thirdly, it is compensatory model that does not promote the negative duties of justice and as a moral obligation, rather argues for the compensation to rectify the historical injustices. Fourthly, it does not explore how to ensure the fair and equal access to the global resource by the global poor. So, if you ask me to sum up these whole claims against the GRD, it is like that, GRD is of course a modest proposal, can contribute to the eradication of global poverty over the period of time. But I personally feel, this is my personal opinion, that it's a kind of compensatory idea of justice. And in this idea, we are trying to rectify whatever historical injustices have been done in the past. That is one of the serious claims. However, Pogge talks about, non-tariff, non-participant tariffs to deal with the non-complier nations, but he's not sure what institutional structure or design is required to combat that, whether it should be coercive, semi-coercive, decentralized or sheer institutional design. So I have some questions against this model following the cosmopolitan tradition, and those are, why should nations give up their ownership rights over the natural resources that are within the ambit of their own territory? That is a kind of moral question on the nation's sovereignty over the resources. and what moral obligation do states owe towards the resource deficient nations in order to eradicate global poverty and fulfill the rights of the global poor. Now let's move to the another institutional design given by liberal egalitarian Simon Kenny. This is one of the influencing model I have ever seen to institutional design. It includes almost you say all the principles of democratic institutional design, but it fails in answering some of the very crucial questions of global justice. And you can look at the first one is what will be the nature and the level of immediacy in order to work out any principle of global distribution, and how must this address the issue of bad brute luck, because the bad brute luck is one of the issue which needs to be taken seriously and institutionalized at the global level to deal with the global poverty and to address the problems of global poverty correctly in moral sense. How to incorporate the voices from the powerless global south in the proposed structure, and what mechanisms of decentralization may be required to uphold states' autonomy, because when you say that we need distribution across the national border, then the first question that comes to the mind of state is that what about their autonomy and sovereignty? So they are not ready at all to compromise with their autonomy and sovereignty, and that enable and make them accountable to the global duties of justice. This is, the last one is very serious issue, and nothing has been done, although Simon Kenny is trying very much to deal with the idea of non-compliance while dealing with the idea of combating climate change. So how to deal with the issues of non-compliance? You cannot expect every democratic state to help out of kind of moral willingness to the distant poor. So suppose you are making a kind of common pooled fund, and those nations who are not contributing to those pooled fund to eradicate global poverty or to allocate funds for poverty alleviation programs in many parts of the developing nation states. Now how to deal with those nation states? Now the third is about what Martha Nussbaum talks about globalizing capability. This is also one of the convincing institutional design. What Martha Nussbaum says that we can globalize the capability to enhance the skills and capabilities of global poor, so that they can ensure their minimum decent life. But what I find that she's all right, she highlights all the principle, includes domestic basic structure, international institutions like IMF, WTO, World Bank and all that, business groups, NGOs, civil society organization, but still she is not very clear about what institutional arrangement is required to globalize the capabilities and ensuring minimum decent life of the global poor. The last I am dealing is with what Alan Buchanan is trying to propose, a kind of cosmopolitan institutional proposal to deal with, or to address the problems of global poverty. But, I have serious claims to this institutional proposal, and the first one is that strikes much to me is that why Alan Buchanan is all the time harping upon the preventive use of force, if model has to be cosmopolitan. Secondly, I don't know why this preventive use of force is, this idea of using preventive use of force has to be passed by the United Nations Security Council in order to restore justice or peace in any part of the world. As we know that we have no fair representation of third world countries in the United Nations Security Council, then the whole idea of authorization of preventive use of force may go against the interest of the developing nation state. And lastly, there could be a kind of camps within the decision-making structure, those who are supporting the preventive use of force and those who are not supporting. So the whole institutional arrangement could collapse. This is also a kind of fear in that model. Now, what I am trying to propose a kind of institutional design, you may disagree with that, but the first layer, what I am trying to institutionalize is a kind of deliberative body of the world leaders, and this deliberative body will focus especially on the representation from the global south. This body will deliberate upon the issues of setting up a global fund directly or indirectly alleviating, for the poverty alleviation programs in the global south, and it aims at enforcing the duty of justice down the layer. One idea that which is still unexplored, and I am trying to develop some of conceptual clarity on that can we use a kind of term in the first layer while it comes to the decision making process. I am thinking of theorizing on preferential deliberation. When you put the idea of preferential deliberation in the first layer, my whole idea is to bring in the accountability and transparency in the decision making process, and let's first listen to the global south countries what their model or ideas are about how the fund should be collected and utilized. At the layer 2, I am putting global institutions, the World Bank, WTO, and all IMF, all that, and we expect that these institutions will work as an egalitarian institutions to ensure fair distribution of benefits and resources at the global level. Of course, this layer 2 will be under the layer 1 so that they can enforce global duty of justice. Layer 3 is about the business corporations, and I hope that they should mobilize the resources wherever they do business and help the local government in ensuring minimum decent survival for the global poor. So we can take some examples from African continents. The example could be of success and failure, like many of the corporations like Tata and Sahara, they are doing good. Tata has also started Tata Africa initiatives, and Tata is providing scholarships to the African students, whether going to the Cambridge Oxford or coming to India, or they are studying in South Africa. So in a way, this corporation can help in realizing the capabilities or enhancing the capabilities. And the failure stories also are very significant, and we can say how MNCs and TNCs are exploiting the cheap labor. They are also violating the human rights in sub-Saharan African part while exploring for the gas and the fossil fuels and all that. Layer 4, I am deliberately putting civil society, global civil society and social movements, NGOs, and I am trying to derive this idea from what Immanuel Wallerstein uses in his article, like anti-systemic movement. So I'm trying to consider this body as anti-systemic agencies so that it can draw the attention of all the above layers regarding the duty of justice in mitigating the poverty. So we can take example like what I personally think. At present, these NGOs, civil society and social movement, they can remind global institutions and world leaders for their promises to achieve Millennium Development Goals, and which has not been done yet. So they can act as a kind of check and balance or anti-systemic in that way. In conclusion, of course, what kind of future we are looking for to live in a peaceful world, or you say a better world, it could be hunger-free world. Still, we need to settle some of the very crucial issues, and I find the first one is the issue of non-compliance. Second one, how to work on the idea of immediacy, which is still not very even clear to me, how to institutionalize legal and political immediacy so that the duty of justice could be enforced down the layers. Then the next one, how to work on the decentralized model of global governance, ensuring the voices from the global south. Next one, how to address and institutionalize the problem of bad brute luck, which is really, and we can go back to what Ronald Dawkins, reminds us that the bad brute luck is really a serious issue, addressing the poverty in the global south. Now, in the conclusion, what I have tried to write, that I believe that the allocation of duty of justice is an ethical task, and it does not necessarily require coercion all the time. That is what I am trying to emphasize here. But to fulfill these kind of responsibilities, the top layer of the proposed design must be equipped with legal and political immediacy to deal with the non-compliance actor and enforcing the duty of justice down the layer. And next, I further argue that in such an interdependent world, the realization of basic moral rights cannot be a domestic phenomenon only. So, unlike nationalist, argument, I am not, seriously taking them. My argument is quite cosmopolitan in that way. And thus to respond to any global call to protect the basic human rights of global poor, the proposed design must have immediacy transcending the national borders. I am not arguing that the proposed design would be completely coercive in nature, using the threat forces to promote and restore duty of justice, but it will certainly be a kind of semi-coercive institutional arrangement equipped with required legal and political immediacy. But my approach to immediacy differs from what nationalists like Thomas Nagel and Michael Blake consider. I am not on those lines, and what I believe is that the immediacy, whether is or should be limited by national border, I am not believing in that, considering the state as the only juridical body to implement it. Rather, what I believe that we need to explore what kind of immediacy is needed for a robust, redistributive institutional design at the global level. And thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, any questions, thoughts? Great.
Very thorough account of the kind of global structures we might need. But my view is that structures don't give you results. We have had a deliberative body, a worldwide deliberative body that represented the views of all states, and that is the UN General Assembly. The General Assembly in 1984 adopted the resolution, the Declaration on the Right to Development. How long, what is it, 30, 40 years since then? Longer than that, 30 years. Nothing's happened. The Secretary General appointed one special expert after the other to explain how to realize the right to development. Nothing happened. So what's missing? Well, the only reason why we got that resolution through was that there was some kind of international political movement at the political level, and this was like the G77 and the non-aligned movement. Well, it seems to me that to carry this forward, there needs to be there needs to be something coming from below, and so we need better politics, and not just from politicians, but we need social movements. And we need if we're going to have global justice, we need a global social movement to push for it. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Thanks for the comment, sir.
And this is the only reason that I have put the global social movements down the layers of my proposed institutional design. And just to add something on what you commented, that's true. But the first and the foremost question that we need to ask ourselves as a global political community, what kind of future we need to live in, or we wish to live in, and any act or conventions, protocols, or any structural design, are we really intending to eradicate global poverty? And that reminds me what Thomas Pogge sir was presenting yesterday, or we are simply playing with datas. So if that is our intention, so I am really scared that any global collective action in the future could result into any fruitful results to combat either climate change or to eradicate global poverty. What I see, as a global social movements that you reminded me, particularly in the global south, the methodology to combat global issues, the global problem in fact, we have plurality of methodology and we never come to the consensus. So the idea of plurality and contestation and not coming to the consensus really resulting into that we are not able to propose any alternative designing at the global level. So my answer could be, can't we adopt a kind of methodology through which we can at least try to arrive upon consensus, and let's show this solidarity, there's a call from the global south, let's show this solidarity so that, we can also produce our alternative at the world stage. Look, we are not only, we do not wish to be governed by what North America, European Union model is or are, what you are saying. We do have our alternative to be, lived in or governed by.
Great, thanks. Any other questions or comments?
Yes.
My question is basically an addition to the question that Jay asked about. Somehow you are not that much different to Poggy in that sense. So you would follow the Gandhian line that it's the duty of the affluent to help the poor. So that actually invokes the kind of ethical duty that you suggest towards the end. But can it happen in your scheme that it becomes a matter of a right rather than charity that you initially challenged? Quite rightly so, it becomes a matter of right for the poor to claim rightfully for the kind of assistance that's required to enhance their capabilities. That's one. And second, whole of your argument seems to be, guided by the kind of dominant paradigms of poverty measurement that are there in the world. So do you suggest any kind of an alternative model to measure the poverty? Because affluence cannot be a viable, mechanism to measure the world poverty.
All right. To your first claim that I am still within the ambit of what Thomas Pogge is thinking, I think that's not true. When you go to my slides and my presentation carefully, at the very outset I denounced the idea to be gone by what Pogge's GRD proposal is all about. So I am not in that mode. Sorry. And then yes, in a way it could be quite confusing to you, as if you are not getting it clearly that I am talking about the duty of justice and how the affluent should help out the distant poor. That's not the case. When you look at the case carefully, Thomas Pogge argues within the ambit of the the negative conception of the duty of justice, and that is that brings in the idea of institutional imperative. Now suppose if I am into the decision making of World Bank and the policy is being framed to govern the sub-Saharan Africa, by like suppose the food distribution policies, and consciously being a part of that decision making body, and if I know there is something wrong going on and it could harm the very future of that place, then I am the part of that, and I am the cause of that harm. But it will restrict the duty of justice. Suppose if I am not the part of that decision making body, then it means that I do not share any moral responsibility to help them out. So that's not, obviously I'm not on those lines. I am on the lines of positive duty of justice, and that on this planet every individual have equal access to the global resource, and collectively both the institutions and the individuals, we must share certain level of moral obligation to ensure that. And to add your second question, what was that? Yes, of course, it's a matter of right to be, not to be, if I take the Professor Pogge's line, which is not bad, in fact, when you say, I have the right to be, not to be harmed, and suppose a claim is that a poor says, I have every political and moral right to not to be, hungry. So the then whole onus of that culpability shifts not on those only domestic institutions, but also on the global order, we, collectively. So it is of course a right-based approach, what I am talking about. And it is the right of the global poor to live at least the minimum decent life, so that it can ensure, the food, minimum level of medicine, kind of decent shelter and all that.
So, okay, one last question, very quick, our very last one.
We have been talking about a better planet and better world since yesterday. And what Mr. Thomas Pogge also yesterday explained, that how these institutions have been working to present better facts and figures to show the situation is better and is improving. and it reflects on the attitude. And if we see this, and when we talk that every poor person has a right to say food, this is what moral right, basically when we say, it is say what ought to be, because morality has no legal sanction, basically behind. So what ought to be is an ideal situation, means it should be like this, but it is not happening. And seeing the attitude of national, international institutions, how they are working, it seems there is a big contradiction, what ought to be and what they are, trying to show. So this is what I feel what is needed is transformation of human beings, and how it can be done. That should be the focus point. And once it is done, it is achieved, I think then we can have a better world and better planet. Thank you.
Thank you
Of
very
course,
much.
ma'am, just adding few lines. The first, I disagree with the idea that the ought to be is you say the debate that you raised about the legal and moral. I personally feel to combat these kind of global problems, whether climate change and the world food security, I hope that all laws framed to combat or to eradicate, has to have a kind of, moral standing. Until the legality is being supported by morality, then we are again caught up in those dilemmas, what ought to be and what should be. So we must be very clear about that, what we are taking as the baseline, not generally swayed by what the facts and figures are. So yes, of course, that has to be, and we should act like a kind of self-conscious, morally autonomous being that you are talking in terms of what Kant says. So yes, of course, that has to be, and ought to be, has to get legal and moral sanctions as well. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists and to your wonderful questions. It was a very invigorating panel.